Okay, everybody, and I hope you're all comfy while listening to this lecture. It's not really a lecture, it's more like a bit of a guided tour. So here we are in week 6, and we've had a pretty crazy couple of weeks. So I can imagine how unsettled everyone was feeling, and I hope you're feeling more settled now. It's our second last week, so by the end of next week, you'll have a little bit of a lesser load. And I know the early childhood primary cohort have another 7-week unit, so your load will be considerably less, I hope. And with not going on prac at the moment, well, for some of you, that is sort of a bit of a less load, but then it's a bit of an unknown of how you want to sort out your practicums. But I've seen in all the correspondence that there's a lot of support for being able to graduate with this disruption to all the practicums, so that's really good news. So I hope you're keeping your sanity and not climbing the wall as yet, being isolated. So here we go, Aboriginal history in the curriculum. That's what today is about. And it's a pretty big ask because we're looking at early childhood through primary, through secondary. So that's why it's a little bit of a guided tour. I've got some snippets or snapshots. So even though we're sitting here looking at our computers, we're still on Whadjuk Noongar land. And I'd like to acknowledge that the traditional owners are the Whadjuk Noongar, people of the Noongar Nation, and that we are learning together on Whadjuk Noongar Buja. I also would like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Buja, I like that word, Buja. Buja means country or land. So this is Noongar Buja. And it's a Noongar word, so you wouldn't use it in other places outside the Noongar area, which is kind of the southwest. Sadly, also looking at that photograph, I took that last year when we went to the Buja Narning Cultural Walk. So that's on top of Kings Park, also known in one of the Noongar names. It's called Karagara. And we're looking at the Derbil Yerrigan, which is the Swan River. But Derbil Yerrigan doesn't mean swan. You can actually book your own tours. For our unit, we go with the Wally family, but if you go through the Kings Park site, I think there's another couple of businesses or families that run cultural walk and talks through Buja Narning. So let's get stuck into it. All right, the very first thing that you need to think about when you're designing curriculum is where are you going to get your resources from, even though you don't know exactly what you're doing, but you have a bit of an idea of where you're going to get your resources from. And for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander content, the big question is the resource appropriate? Is it credible? Is it authentic? Is it respectful? So the Narragana Wali site has all these documents that will help you evaluate resources in your learning areas, and they also have a generic evaluating resources document. This is what it looks like. Let's go in here. Now, I've lost my cursor a couple of times, so I hope it doesn't go again. Okay, we're in the site. As you can see, this is like a professional development program or section in here for teachers, so you can actually go through here and upskill yourself. And I'm just going to look at the attachments and go straight to the Evaluating Resources Guide. Here we go. And this is the general one. And it asks you when was the resource produced. And it's really important that you look at the time the resource was published, because it's only in recent years that books and resources or any information about Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people has actually had Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander input or voice. Many older resources have been written from a Western point of view or interpreted by Western academics and writers and publishers. So, and much of the information is often misinterpreted. I said the word twice. There are some really credible non-Indigenous historians. So Henry Reynolds, Reynolds, he is a really credible non-Indigenous historian, and he was one of the first people, along with another guy, that brought Indigenous history into academia, and that was during the 70s. So that's just a bit of an aside for some of you history people. Maybe you've already been introduced to Henry Reynolds. My claim to fame is I've had my photograph taken with him. So here we go. I will drop in little tidbits of information as we go along. Not everything is on the slides. So let's start with early childhood. So you can see the red font is Indigenous content. And the document I got this from is from the Narragansett website, and it's one of the maps. It's in that when we went to the evaluating resources, it's one of those attachments. So what I've kind of focused on, oops, here it is. What I've focused on is the NAIDOC site, but you also have Reconciliation Week as well. Now, they're talking about community commemoration, such as NAIDOC Week and Anzac Day, but it's important to bring in National Reconciliation Week. Those are just examples, as well up there. You don't have to say, oh, this is the only thing we can teach. So I want to tell you a little bit about National Reconciliation Week before we look at the NAIDOC site. So the most important thing about National Reconciliation Week for me are the dates. It runs from the 27th of May to the 3rd of June. So this is where it gets hard for me because I can't ask you questions and get answers. It's rhetorical. So why is the 27th of May significant? I can hear some people answering. 27th of May is the anniversary of the 1967 referendum. So if you thought that, you're on the ball. So the 1960 referendum, now that there was a big lead up to that. And the history of that is pretty amazing to read, especially when you learn about the groups that supported the movement. So what they were fighting for and what they wanted the referendum for was to vote yes so that Aboriginal people could be included in the census, because they weren't included in the census before, and so that federal laws could be made for them as well, or included them in federal legislation. Now, why was that important? Well, if you think about it, if you're not in the census, you don't exist. You don't exist for any policy making or any programs or anything. So any health programs, education programs, anything. If you're not in the census, you're not included. So it was very significant that the referendum was passed. Now, the 3rd of June. Why is that date significant? That might be a bit more difficult. Have you heard of Eddie Mabo? Good. Well, the 3rd of June in 1992, that was the day that the Mabo decision was made through the High Court. The High Court recognised that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have rights to the land, and rights existed before the British arrived and can still exist today. So you might ask, well, why did they have to do that? Do you remember the word terra nullius? So when Cook came across this way, somehow it was determined that Australia was terra nullius, meaning terra meaning land, nullius meaning inhabited, empty. It was really strange because Cook himself had approached Aboriginal people, and many other explorers and Dutch botanists had come and developed relationships with Aboriginal people and researched their language and their culture. But the reason why they determined Australia was terra nullius was on the feedback that was given that they could see no civilization, no buildings, no agriculture. However, a few hundred years now later, Bruce Pascoe kind of smashed all those myths. But that's why Australia was terra nullius, and then that's why Eddie Mabo had to fight to recognise the rights that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have to the land. And from the Mabo decision, that's when you find the rise or the development of land rights and of native title. That's another really big history that you could research, especially in secondary. But we're in early childhood, so here's NAIDOC. This is going to be hard keeping to what I want to show you because there's so much I want to show you. So here we go. There's a ton of teacher guides here. So when you go to Aboriginal websites developed by Aboriginal people or authentic websites like Narragana Wali website, and if you have a look, I have a little bit of inside information because the friend that I went to school with, she's an educator, and she's from Broome, she's Yaru, and she was sort of like the main developer of many of these resources on the Narragana Wali website. So you can have a look through these websites yourself. Just going to go to the next one. Oh, there's my cursor. So we're year 4. A little time to read through that. Now, secondary people, it's really good to kind of like listen into some of what I'm talking about because there are secondary arms that come off the topics that I talk about as well. So you can hook into those topics. You can hook into NAIDOC. You can hook into Reconciliation Week because there's many topics that you can hook off and use for secondary as well. So here we go. Just that first point there before I go to the museum is the Aboriginal languages map. And that is such a good resource. It's hopefully I remember to go to the website. It's on the IATS's website. And some of you might have seen the map as well. I know I've shown the map to my classes. But then you find the names, the actual, the proper names for all the areas. Names are so important. They define the country. So we've got, Noongar Nation is a little bit different because you have Noongar Nation and lots of like other cultural groups in there. Like you have Wajak people, you've got Minang people, Baladong people. So there's lots of different Goreng. So there's lots of other cultural groups within the Noongar cultural group. But outside of that, in Western Australia, they're all individual groups. So like Broome is Yaru, Derby's Nigana people there, Fitzroy Crossing, original people there, Bunaba people, Around the Roban area is Yinjibardi, and around so like the wheat belt area around there, Buddy Mire country, and yeah, so it'd be really great if you know the name of country there and you use that instead of the Western name that it's given. So you use them in conjunction, but it's really cool using the proper names. Okay, I'll use my cursor. So there's quite a lot there that you can see. But here we go. I'm just going to go down to the bottom here. Some people that came into some Aboriginal people that came into contact, that early contact time with British people. Now these two now are eastern staters. There's Pemulwuy and Bennelong. And here we have Yagan. So you can, there's a ton of information on Yagan, and you've got Yagan Square as well. So hey, you can even take your kids there. But I just want to look at Bennelong because he's from the east. Oh, here it is. I lose my cursor all the time. Now he was really quite a significant person. So you're looking around the Parramatta area, okay, and he was very outspoken, very charismatic, and he was actually captured because of his linguistic skills and his I suppose his outgoing nature. They captured him so that he could here we go. Am I reading this? So he learnt English really quickly, and he became a interpreter for the governor. And this is only a really short history. There's other places you can Google this everywhere, and you'll find quite a lot of information on Bennelong. But he was also taken to Britain and presented to the king, and he did have his friend there with him, but he was really homesick. It took a long time to come back, because you can imagine it was like, it takes a long time to sail across to Britain and back again. And it was kind of showcased over there, I guess. It like showed off a bit, like on display. Sorry. But there's a lot more to this story, and there's a picture of him. But that's just a quick snapshot of who Bennelong was. So he had a really unique relationship with the British here. Let's go back to our slide. The next one. All right. This is another curriculum map because I'm going into like this is what we call a secondary section. I'll just show you where this map is. So this is what it looks like, and this is where you'll see I've taken screenshots of sections. So it goes from year 7 to year 10. So here's our year 7 example. So now these are examples. There's as you start looking around at the information out there, you'll find other examples of that you can investigate for history. So we're just going to have a look at Mungo Man and Mungo Woman, or Mungo Lady and Mungo Man. While we're waiting, it looks like this is going to be a bit slow. I might click on that again. Might work a bit better. Yep. So one of the most significant outcomes of this find was the dating of the inhabitation of Australia by Aboriginal people, because it started off with in the early days, they thought Aboriginal people were here like 10,000 years ago, then they said 20,000 years ago, then they said 30,000 years ago, and then Mungo Man and Mungo Lady said it at 42,000 years ago, and now as their dating equipment and the science for dating has become much more sophisticated. They can date, and also the other thing is they are actually doing archaeological digs, and they're actually looking for evidence, whereas before it wasn't even considered to do that. So now they're finding artifacts that are dating back 50,000, 60,000 years ago. So here we are. So this is a good website because it is the Mungo National Park, so it has a lot of history about the area, but also about Mungo Lady and Mungo Man. So excellent bit of resource here. But you can Google this as well to find other resources, and you use your resource guide, evaluating resource guide, to check it out. So year 9, I've got a couple of things I wanted to show you here. Oh, I forgot to do the language map. I'll do that later. So I'm going to go to this point here, explain the effects of contact, and we're looking at some of the massacres that have happened. So right on our doorstep, the Pinjarra massacres, you can Google that, and also Noel Nannup, and there's a couple of other Aboriginal educators and Aboriginal cultural authorities that do field trips to Pinjarra to educate people about the Pinjarra massacres, and they do it for university groups and school groups as well. I've just lost my cursor again. Oh, there it is. So I'm going here to a little bit north of Perth. So Flying Foam Massacre, the Killing Fields of Murujuga, and you'll say, wonder where Murujuga is. So that's the Burrup Peninsula. Now that is a very, very iconic destination, and there's been so much controversy, so much conflict with the development of the Burrup Peninsula because of the Aboriginal heritage, the rock paintings, the etchings, and the sacred sites that are there that have been just totally demolished by the growth and development of the Burrup, the oil and gas out there. And that's another story you can follow. It's on the internet. You can find the story. Actually, those who have Cindy as their tutor, Cindy is a historian, and she was on the Heritage Council and History Council, and Cindy has she's done a lot of work in this area with the heritage for around the Burrup area and FMG, Fortescue Metals Group. She's actually, like, a lot of her focuses, she's got quite a bit written about the Fortescue Metals group and the railway that they've ended up putting around this hill in that area. So let's get back to, the Burrup Peninsula, but ask those of you who have Cindy, ask her about the heritage work that she does, or the history work. So the Flying Foam Massacre, now, why this is so quite devastating is that it started off with one act of retribution. So you'll find that Where's his name here? I can't find the name of the person. This Constable Griffiths, he was a policeman up there. He'd abducted a young Aboriginal woman, and her husband, Coulibaly, was arrested by him for stealing flour from a pearling boat. So you kind of just wonder why that happened. And so Coulibaly was obviously rescued, but then there was retaliation from the police as well. But instead of, focusing or arresting the person who they thought or had killed this person, there was a very concerted campaign of killing Aboriginal people in that area. And this story tells you about that. Knowing this story will probably give you a bit more understanding of the conflict that happens in that area and the significance of that area as well. So let's have a look. The other thing that we can look at is the Anzacs and the Indigenous servicemen. So most of you may, if you do kind of take notice of Anzac, you would notice nowadays there's much more recognition of Indigenous soldiers. And down at the Anzac Memorial in Albany, that's pretty cool. They've got a lot of recognition of Indigenous soldiers there compared to what it was before. Oh goodness, let me just go back again. Here we go. So here you just head to the Australian War Memorial. There's been a considerable amount of research and work done on Indigenous servicemen. So that's just one place. You can find, there's other places as well on the internet that you can find. Year 10. Now here we get into some of the civil rights movements that happened here in Australia. Now this 1965 Freedom Ride, in the same time in the US there were freedom rides for in the civil rights movements there, and the Aboriginal people especially, they were strong leaders here that recognised the ability of people to be able to resist and fight for civil rights. And if we have a look at the freedom rides, so Charles Perkin, he was a key instigator of this. Charles Perkin was also the first Aboriginal man to graduate with a degree from university. So we can go here. So what they did was they got on this bus and they went to all the towns that, because there was legal and enforced segregation where Aboriginal people weren't allowed to go into the public swimming pools, Aboriginal people weren't allowed to go into pubs or bars, and many other places where they were segregated from. So you can see how the civil rights movement began to move here. And they commemorate that ride now. So if you Google it up, you'll see some of the anniversary rides that have happened across, this is over east. There you go, New South Wales. It's pretty exciting civil rights movements there. And you'll find that if you start looking for these, you'll find a great deal more of significant events and people in history. Here's year 10. All right, now this is something that really gets the students I teach in the Indig majors, because INDG2500, which is a Indigenous Majors unit, is one of the units I teach in second semester. So the Murujuga massacre, that belongs with that unit, because that unit's all about the Northwest. So it's the Gascoyne, Murchison and the Kimberley. And it is chock-a-block full of history just in that one unit in that area. The other thing that we touch on is the Declaration of Rights for Indigenous Peoples. So it's the United Nations Declaration of Rights for Indigenous Peoples. If you haven't heard of that, this is something that you really need to probably access, because it's fundamental to understanding the rights of Indigenous people and the fight that they have to gain those rights. So have a look through here. But just a couple of really interesting points that might not be so interesting once I tell you them, because you go, oh yeah, that makes sense. So let me have a look. I'll just go quickly to the declaration. It might just give you a bit of, oh no, it's not found. That's okay. We'll just go back here. I'll just go, here we go, to this one. No, doesn't like that one. Let's go back here. Maybe it likes this one. Right, here we go. That's the that sheets. Let's try this one. No. This one. Nope, doesn't like it there. It actually comes up on the Australian human rights website, but you have to look at it in a different spot. Sorry. But what is really interesting is when the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, they adopted that on the 13th of September in 2007. There were 143 countries that were in favour of it and adopted it. 11 abstained from adopting it, and 4 countries voted against the United Nations Declarations of the Rights of Indigenous People. 4 countries voted against. Which countries were those 4 countries? I'll just give you like a few seconds to maybe think of a couple. USA was one. New Zealand was another. Canada was one. And the 4th one? Yes, Australia was the 4th one. We did sign it after. We signed it after 2 years, on the 3rd of April 2009. Think of dates? That was after Kevin Rudd did his apology. Have a think on that. So this is a very interesting document. Now I'm going to just Google it up so that you actually can see it, because I did see it before. Yeah, we'll go to the reconciliation site. Okay. Oh, that's just the information. Okay, not very. Let's go to this one. No, we are going back to the same place. Let's go to this one. It was it. Okay, not very. I should have just kept that open. It, just not sure why it's not opening up right now. So, watch the declaration on the right. So you can watch it on the video. Get it? Downloads. Okay. So here, in a poster, we've got all the articles that make up the rights for Indigenous peoples. It covers rights for participation in development. The really central thing, the central principle for the rights of Indigenous peoples is the right for self-determination. So Aboriginal people or Indigenous people can make decisions about their education, about continuing their culture, about their connection to land, laws and customs, health, living conditions. So it's a good little poster there. And Australia not just didn't sign it, they voted against it in the beginning. So that's, if you're looking at, what do you call it, civics and citizenship, it's a very good one to pull apart. What have I got here? Right, here's an Aboriginal History Resource Guide, which just gives you links to more resources across. All the different resources. This is the Narragansett website. So it gives you a bit of a timeline, so you actually can choose. Because history was here before. You have the links to take you to the information. So as you can see, there's a lot of history. Well, a lot more than you thought there was. Or could imagine. And that's just a snapshot. Okay, they're just key events. They're not all the events or all the people. I said I was going to mention a couple more localised West Australian people. Have you heard of Jundamara? So Jundamara was a Bunuba man. And let's have a look if we can go back out here. We'll have a look at Jundamara. Now he was famous, the Bunuba people. There's a movie on Canopy. And he was a resistance leader. Bunuba warrior. Up in the Kimberley, if you know Fitzroy Crossing, around that area there, and you can see there's a kids book there, but there's also young adult books as well. And if you've heard of Tunnel Creek and Geeky Gorge, that's where he hid out. So all those places, when I visit them now, mean so much more. They're not just a gorge and a pretty piece of rock. There's a whole story that lives there that you can feel. So imagine learning the stories all around Western Australia and then going and seeing those places not as a tourist to see how pretty they are, but going to feel the history. And I'll just get up the language map. And I tend to go to the IATSA site. Now this is a digital one, but you can purchase the map from their online store. I'm pointing to my screen and you can't see me pointing. So as you can see, where are we? Oh, there's Yarra country there. It's Broome, Nigana country, New Derby there. Jabba Jabba country up here. I know someone that comes from there. And go around here. You can see them. Whoops. There's Ginger Body. Yuwat, Baladang, Wajak, Ulaman, Minang, that's Albany around there. Jaybuman, Wardandi. Any surfers? Wardandi country is surfing country. Okay. And just this last thing, quickly go and have a look at this site. I think I've gone over time already. Okay, so this is by the National Library of Australia, and it's lots of history, but it embeds Indigenous history in it as well. So here's year 3. You've got connections to country, diversity. Go through. You got through year 10. What's in senior secondary? So even though they got Cook in the Pacific, they've even got Indigenous responses to Cook and his voyage. And piece of information that I just love, and I post it every time this event happens. Who knows why the 14th of January is very special? The 14th of January. Not a trick question, not a silly question. Many people think about Valentine's Day on the 14th of February. Did I say February? That's what I meant to say. The 14th of February was the day the Hawaiians killed Cook on Big Island or Hawaii. So there you go. I advertise that fact every 14th of July. That is my Facebook post. So there you go. A bit of a side bit of information. So, thank you very much for listening to my news. And I hope you have a good day. And I will try and get this quiz up as soon as possible. It should be better because my stress load or my workload is a tiny bit better now. So see you in class. Bye.